not only has it not done anything, it's actually upgrading an EU-Israel trade agreement, by which Israel, which is desperate to be seen as a member of the European Command, never mind the Eurovision Song Contest and all the other things they want to get involved in. It's all part of the same movement. They want to be accepted. And Europe has forged even closer economic ties. Because therein lies the key. If Europe was willing to say, even for a minute, you're not going to get preferential treatment. We don't want to send troops in, we want you to accord credit and respect to the rule of law, which has been forged over hundreds of years. People have lost their lives to get to the situation we have now in the international arena, and Israel's just driving a cart and horses straight through the middle of it. So the Russell Tribunal, I have the report here, again came out unanimously, almost like the International Court of Justice, saying that action has to be taken. Now, there are things that can be done, and I'm actually going to just quickly, as it were, summarise what they are, because there's no point in me ranting on unless you say, well, what are you going to do about it? First thing is, arrest warrants of universal jurisdiction. If you have contacts, if you know of cases where people are coming to this country who are responsible for Israeli policy, they need to be arrested. It needs to go on, just as somebody tried to arrest Tony Blair. Oh, Tony Blair. Nearly forgot him. Not surprising now, is it, really? Not difficult now. However, he pops up in The Independent today, reminding everybody that he is the envoy in the Middle East. Yes, well, I happened to see the hotel where he's booked a floor in the Colony Hotel. And I think the British taxpayer is paying for this. He's hardly ever been there, and has certainly not made any, as it were, advances on the roadmap to peace. And of course, there's a good reason, a number of reasons, which I'm going to touch on in a moment. So, Tony Blair says in his speech, and I read this speech, and what's it all about? It's about how Arabs have got to stop being prejudiced, how Arabs have got to come together, how Arabs are going to outnumber, and then I look at the end, where was he giving this speech? To an Israeli foundation in America. So he's doing absolutely nothing towards the resolution of what he sees as a two-party state, was obviously one of the solutions. But of course, in a sense, the reason why he's undercut is because he's the prime example of undermining the rule of law. However, universal jurisdiction. Another source of, if you want to take action, British companies are involved in supplying materials to the illegal settlements and things that are going on, like the building of the wall and so on. And so in France there's an action against a company that are building a tramway in East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem, illegal, annexed by the Israelis. It's all in the judgment. So you can begin to think about civil actions if you want to be proactive. There's something else called BDS, which is boycott, divestment and solidarity. And we had one of the judges who sat alongside me was part of Mandela's administration, and he was very clear that one of the main reasons that apartheid crumbled in the end was isolation. The fact that white South Africans felt as though they were pariahs, as though nobody really wanted to have them, talk to them, play rugby with them, whatever. Israel, I'm afraid, unless it wakes up pretty soon, has to face a similar future. And I would want to suggest to you, don't buy Israeli goods, particularly if they come from the settlements and they're now obliged to label them. Because of course that's illegal as well. Divestment, take money out, don't put money in. And of course sanctions. Difficult for you as an individual, but as a country we could employ sanctions. The UN could, there's a whole range of things they can do before ever invading a country, I'm not suggesting that anyway, is sanctions. So these are very positive steps that can be taken. And if you really are feeling very active, it's not a secret. I have described the blockade on the sea front in Gaza. The waters are polluted. The sewage goes straight into the sea because they haven't got the fuel to run the sewage plants. So the fishermen are really finding it very difficult to fish. Plus the restricted areas, quite illegal, 300 meters is nothing. And if they stray anywhere near Israeli gunboats, they get shot out of the water. Day after day after day. So the blockade from the sea, hopefully, is going to be broken at least for a short while in May by the Free Gaza Flotilla. So if there's anybody in the audience who would like to join it, there are 2 Irish women that we've met very recently who are going to be leading the way. In other words, it's this solidarity on an issue that's important, which brings me, in fact, to the remarks I've just made about Tony Blair. The biggest single thing that I feel upset about, besides what's going on there, but that's just an illustration of what's been going on, in fact, over the last 15, 20 years, is a presidential centralized form of government, not democracy. We all know we don't really have a democratic situation any longer. We have a democratic deficit, a democratic bankruptcy in this country. We have Tony Blair, and do I need to rehearse the arguments about going to war? No, I don't. Illegal. And he comes along to the Iraq inquiry through the back door, says it all pretty well, and his performance was not much better. He's being called back because the inquiry, I forgot to ask him a few personal questions about a document that was declassified on the very day he gave evidence, indicating that his agreement with the United States predated the 9/11 incidents and explosions. The calculus of risk didn't change at 9/11. The memo that was declassified on the day he gave evidence indicated he had an agreement with Bush to get rid of Saddam on the pretext of weapons of mass destruction. He wasn't asked a single question about that. I hope next time he goes back, they do ask him. And what Tony Blair has managed to do single-handedly, is to dissemble the rule of law by the act of going to war, by the war crimes committed there, depleted uranium, cluster bombs, not dissimilar to the use of white phosphorus in Gaza, which leads to brain-damaged children because the toxicity sinks into the ground. War crimes, rendition, which when Jack Straw was first asked about this, I don't know whether he thought it was a song or something, he just said, no, rendition, no, don't know anything about it. Of course they did. We now know they were using an English base to take people in unmarked planes to unmarked places of detention, where they practiced, of course, torture. And the British government, no, we're not involved. And now we learn from the Parliamentary Committee yesterday, or today in fact, that the British government's definition of torture is far too narrow, because of course there are various ways in which you can get involved. And then we had Belmarsh and all the judgments about that. I think the high watermark for me was when the House of Lords, now the Senate, House of Lords, actually said, well, the Supreme Court, but you know, it's the same sort of thing. Supreme Court, the House of Lords, I never thought I'd find myself saying that a High Court judge has been the bastion of liberty, but I'm afraid that's what it's come to. And thank goodness, they actually compared what the Labour government was doing in the United Kingdom with Hitler, Napoleon, and Stalin. Now that's pretty rare. And if you get a High Court judge doing it, you know we're in trouble.